Laughter was the foundation of Mel Brooks' empire, but it wasn't always simple. He's opening the vault at the age of 98, and it contains more than just jokes. Before anything happens, Dom DeLuise bursts into laughing. Shakespeare and Madeline Kahn are treated like slapstick comedians by Gene Hackman, who demands mid-scene rewrites in full costume, although he never starred. Richard Pryor is the author of Fire. It's an abstract of his true love, staring him in the face and asking, really? As Cloris Leachman rejects every note, they almost broke him, and these were tales. The man who laughed too much was Dom DeLuise. Mel Brooks was aware of turmoil. Nothing could have prepared him for the insanity of working with Dom DeLuise, but he built entire careers on it. They worked together in legendary fashion. Men in Tights, Spaceballs, Robin Hood, History of the World Part 1, and Silent Movie. Despite the laughing, Mel was gradually losing her mind. It wasn't ego that was Dom's issue. It wasn't INDOLENCE. Not even artistic distinctions were at issue. It was his own laughing. Sometimes even before the cameras started rolling, Dom would burst out of character after being in character for more than a few seconds. Mel once compared it like guiding a ticklish child. When you say action, Dom would already be struggling to breathe, hiding behind his fists and trembling. When Mel stated that scenes needed to be reshot 5, 10, 15 times in order to obtain a clean take, he wasn't kidding. History of the World Part 1 was the worst or perhaps the most memorable moment. Dom just had one line to say, from the other side of the room. However, Madeline Kahn, ever the silent saboteur, arched an eyebrow. Dom went crazy. He fell, while the team hung around waiting, tired. He laughed for 45 minutes. Mel will always remember that day, nor did he ever forgive it. However, he continued to hire Dom because it was gold after you got over the laughs, and Dom managed to complete a take. His presence was captivating and his timing was instinctive. He was living in a universe that was based solely on humorous impulse rather than acting. Mel knew that's why he kept bringing Dom back, even after he vowed never to do it again. Their friendship was equally tumultuous offset. Dom would arrive on site with freshly made pasta, feed the team, share anecdotes, and crack jokes. It was impossible not to love him, yet it was impossible to control him. Mel, who loves rhythm and accuracy, was always perplexed by how someone so haphazard could appear flawless on film. Despite his resentment, he admired it more. Looking back on his career years later, Mel was unafraid to answer the question of who made him go the most crazy on set. Dom, he said. I miss him every day, and I hated working with him. The way we think of it, it wasn't hate. It was a form of creative agony that only occurs when you love someone too much to fire them. Frustration based on intense attachment. Despite ruining moments, Dom managed to preserve the movies. The brilliant person who questioned everything was Madeline Kahn. Madeline Kahn was the storm masquerading as elegance. If Dom DeLuise was the clown who was unable to maintain a straight face, she was the focal point of Mel's favorite movies, including Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, High Anxiety, and History of the World Part 1. Nevertheless, she was the one who frequently caused him to doubt his authority. Madeline wasn't merely acting she dissected. She arrived to challenge authority rather than obey it. She discussed camera angles, questioned blocking, and dissected lines. She voiced her concerns if anything didn't sit right. She insisted on a rewriting if she felt a sentence was beneath her character. Not recommended, demanded. Who was accustomed to being in the middle of the mayhem, found himself in the middle of it all at once, with Madeline holding the match. She was frequently late. Mel would be prepared. The team would be waiting. The lights would be blazing, and Madeline would enter peacefully and unconcerned. She always smiles calmly, as though time were bending about her, without ever apologizing. It made him insane. However, she was untouchable after the camera rolled. Consider Glowing Saddles. Her portrayal of Lily Von Stupp is still recognizable. There was a series of debates and reworks behind each of those moments. Despite the draw, the eyes, and the terrible timing, she desired to practice it in a new way. Her goal was to alter the punchline. She asked about the stage design. Mel was eager to get going. Madeline aimed for perfection. It worsened during Young Frankenstein. She was well versed in melodrama and vanity, which were necessary for her part as Elizabeth. Madeline, however, wasn't merely playing for laughs. She desired motivation for her character. Mel wasn't ready to respond to the questions she posed to him. She argued about the psychology behind each movement of her face. As a result, the 1970s saw some of the most memorable comedies. However, Mel claimed that he was fatigued every day when he left the set. Working with her was like trying to wrestle a cat in a storm, he once said. Nevertheless, he kept returning because he felt in his heart that she improved his work. Her intuition was keen, yet she was difficult to please. She had more faith in her own vision than anyone else's. That was frustrating for Mel, but it was also what made her so exceptional. She questioned everything, he claimed. She gave me the impression that I was inexperienced. She was correct. The time Hackman Kahn once seen unending suspense. Mel Brooks rarely collaborated with actors such as Gene Hackman, Oscar-winning, serious and well-trained, a man from the world of The Conversation and The French Connection. not the realm of slapstick horses and fart jokes. However, Gene requested to appear in the movie while Young Frankenstein was being made in 1974, directly through his friend Gene Wilder, rather than via agents or studios. Hackman was intrigued after seeing Wilder's early scenes. Even if it was only once, he wanted to attempt humor. Mel was taken aback. What was Gene Hackman doing in a comedy starring Mel Brooks? However, how could he refuse? One memorable scene was the end result. Hackman as the blind recluse who feeds Frankenstein's monster soup and cigars. On paper it was a brief, absurd, and transient joke. However, Hackman took a Shakespearean approach to it. He committed every beat to memory. He desired time for rehearsal. He desired to have conversations on motivation. The rest of the cast, meanwhile, was joking, riffing, and switching lines in mid-take. Mel, who thrived on that intensity, had to abruptly change course. The set decelerated, the atmosphere shifted. Hackman gave a faultless performance. However, it wasn't simple to get there. Mel remembered how Hackman remained silent when people behaved badly. Everyone felt like they were wasting their time because they were patient, not amused. Each ruined take was worthy of a glance. Firm, but not angry. A glance that conveyed the message. Some of us came to work. Directing Gene Hackman was like trying to play jazz with someone who brought a metronome. Mel subsequently remarked, was hardly an explosive kind of tension. There will be no shouting or outbursts, just two experts with radically different styles. Attempting to compromise, they never collaborated again. Not with resentment, but with comprehension. There was no outburst. Mel required performers who flourished amid chaos. Hackman needed a strategy, a script that was constant throughout the day. Mel, however, would never forget that scene. How Hackman made a stupid part sing by giving it his all. We were different animals, he added. But it worked in that situation. That day, Cloris Leachman, the disobedient woman, Cloris Leachman did not act in a boisterous manner. She displayed her own brand of defiance, but she didn't yell or rush. Offset, silent, unrelenting, and hard to ignore. Mel Brooks referred to her as one of the most gifted actors he had ever worked with. Additionally, he claimed that she brought him more headaches than practically anybody else. She portrayed Frau Blucher, the housekeeper whose name made horses squeal. In Young Frankenstein, their first significant joint project, it was a strange, unusual, and memorable part. However, Cloris resisted practically everything behind the scenes. Cloris would silently stare at Mel as he gave instructions. She would then inquire as to why, just with sincere conviction, not with a bad attitude. She had to think it was true. She wouldn't do it if she didn't. Working with her, according to Mel, was like attempting to operate a Ferrari without brakes. Despite her speed, strength, and enthusiasm, she disliked being led. She would challenge line readings. She would offer revisions. And occasionally she would completely disregard the suggestions and proceed in her own manner. Yes, it is annoying. However, the takes frequently produced superior results. The same thing occurred at High Tension, when she portrayed the icy, menacing Nurse Diesel. Mel thought the character was inflated and insane. Cloris brought calculated precision and a hint of danger. Although it wasn't what he requested, it did the trick. He was exhausted by her. Mel claimed that he needed a nap to recuperate after spending the entire day filming with Cloris. She never called it in, though. She was never lethargic. She arrived impassioned, ready, and unwilling to accept anything less than perfection. Mel acknowledged that she was wearing him out. However, she improved me. And that was the greatest compliment Mel Brooks could have received. The brilliant man who never appeared on screen as Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor never made an appearance in Blazing Saddles, not as the sheriff on screen or in the credits as an actor. However, every frame has the imprint of his spirit. The film's candor, incisive comedy, and unapologetically racial satire made it both entertaining and extremely uncomfortable. That was earlier. Mel Brooks wanted him for more than simply the film. He composed Bart's part for him. Richard's voice was already in Mel's mind when he was writing the script in the beginning of 1973. Pryor was becoming a powerhouse in comedy at the time, a truth-teller who used humor as a weapon to expose the hypocrisy of American society. He was different from everyone else and had just recently begun to achieve mainstream success with gritty stand-up albums like Craps After Hours. When Mel saw that fire, he realized that this is the kind of individual who can enter a bigoted frontier town, wear a badge, smile, and give the system the finger while making it seem amusing. Warner Brothers, however, failed to see what Mel did. Pryor wasn't a visionary in their eyes. He was unreliable. The studio was uneasy about his reputation for being unpredictable, missing shows frequently, abusing drugs, and destroying relationships. They were afraid he wouldn't arrive, or, worse, that he would be intoxicated. Pryor was already barred from a number of talk shows, and Hollywood was still reeling from the scandals surrounding his notorious 1971 meltdown in Las Vegas. Still, Mel stood up for him. He pleaded with the studio to change their mind. He was aware that no one else could bring the same unvarnished danger and honesty to Bart's character. However, the response was definitive. Not before, no danger. Look for a more secure person. Mel was devastated. Richard was, too. However, Pryor did something unexpected rather than leave. He was taken inside the writing room by Mel. Additionally, Pryor co-wrote the movie without receiving credit. That was no consolation award. The fire was inventive. The writing sessions gained notoriety. Mel put up a group that consisted of Alan Ewer, Norman Steinberg, and Andrew Bergman. But Richard was the one who established the tone. He tested everyone's comfort zone, pushed the jokes farther, and introduced a degree of racial satire never before seen in popular comedy. The notorious incident in which Bart says, "Nobody move," or the N-word gets it, while holding a gun to his own head. It was pure Pryor. Daring, dark, and humorous all at once. However, collaborating with him wasn't simple. According to Mel, it was like waiting for lightning. Richard might arrive prepared, smart, and bursting with quips that made everyone laugh. Or he might not even show that he was fighting against pressure from all sides, addiction, and insecurity. He would produce 5 brilliant pages one day, then disappear for 3 the next. Mel held him close. Nevertheless, he was aware that Blazing Saddles would become less effective without Richard's voice. Although Cleveland Little, a gifted actor in his own right, performed the role of Bart, Richard Pryor was the real Bart. Mel acknowledged years later that the regret never completely went away. If Richard had starred, I still wonder what the film would have been. We kept his fire in the script, but we lost something not having him on camera, he remarked. He struck me with lightning, and I simply attempted to capture it. In a bittersweet turn of events, Blazing Saddles became a landmark in culture. However, the guy who contributed to its revolutionary nature was barely visible. Pryor will later appear in his own motion pictures. None of them included the same satire that he and Mel created in that writing session, including Stir Crazy, Silver Streak, and The Toy. The person who knew him too well was Anne Bancroft. There was no director's flair, no acting, and no artistic bluff with Anne Bancroft. The only actor who actually recognized when Mel Brooks was acting crazily was his wife. She was therefore the most difficult person he had ever worked with. When they agreed to co-star in To Be or Not to Be 1983, a reimagining of the 1942 classic set in Nazi-occupied Poland, they had been married for decades. Mel created and took action. The main female part was taken by Anne. Nothing about working with an actor was straightforward, even though it should have been easy and familiar. She didn't treat him like director Mel Brooks on set. She regarded him like Mel, the guy who battled with her about burnt toast and neglected to take out the trash. She had a lot of questions. She stated if a line didn't sound true. She confronted him in front of everyone if his instructions seemed unclear. "Really?" Mel asked, raising one eyebrow, and joking that no studio boss had ever made him perspire as much as Anne did. Instead of yelling, they battled with intelligence, accuracy, and a great deal of respect for one another. He and she both refused to give up. However, every debate produced a better result. Every scenario was enhanced by Anne's elegance, solemnity, and unadulterated clarity. Mel acknowledged that she could shatter him with a sentence, but the scenario was frequently salvaged by the same sentence. Offset, they were hilarious, loving, and married, but on set, it was a battleground based on honesty and love. "She didn't let me off the hook," Mel once remarked. "Never. That's why I adored her and why I almost died trying to lead her." She was the actor he trusted the most and the most resilient person he had ever worked with. Who, then, surprised you the most? Was it Anne Bancroft who prevented her husband from winning, or Richard Pryor who was never cast in the part? Please leave your response below. Please hit subscribe, like the video, and keep in mind that if Mel Brooks ever expressed distaste for working with you, it was most likely a sign of your brilliance.